My name is Grover Wray, and I am the president of Animus Advisors, a consulting firm helping companies build purpose, vision, and values inside their company. Prior to that opportunity that I have today, I was the Chief Human Resource Officer for a variety of different companies here in the United States. But these companies were global companies, so it kind of expanded the world, and I've traveled, I think, to every continent in the world but Antarctica at this point. So I think I have a good sense of the challenges that are ahead of you and also the opportunities as well. And I also have a great appreciation for the things that you have accomplished over these last many weeks as you've worked through your Launching Leaders program. So perhaps I can share some insights with you as you prepare to now launch from this Launching Leaders program into the opportunity to apply these leadership principles in real life, both at work and at home and in whatever setting, community, or church that you might find. So let me share some thoughts that perhaps will support what you've read in this final chapter, and also be able to illustrate with some stories how you can apply these principles on a going forward basis. So over the last several weeks, you've had the chance to study these wonderful leadership principles and practice them along the way. And one of the things I love about this last chapter in this book is this principle of don't look back. And the reason I think it's such an important principle is because you really now have set yourself on a path. You've changed your behavior. You have new behaviors that are going to be part of your future going forward. Well, how do those behaviors become part of you? Let me give you an example to illustrate how powerful those new behaviors can be if you continue to repeat them. There's a principle called the mental map. And the mental map is a principle that allows somebody to operate in kind of almost an autopilot kind of way without really thinking about what they're doing. And these maps are really powerful because it allows you to kind of process multiple things at the same time. And perhaps the greatest example of a mental map that we can all relate to is how we commute to and from our work every day. Whether it's by public transportation or whether we drive a car, it really doesn't matter. Whether we walk, for that matter, it really doesn't matter. But once you've done something consistently enough, such as traveling to and from work every day, you develop a pattern or a mental map. And if you think about it, if you think even today when you're watching this video about your transportation from home to work, you realize that you probably never gave one thought to the process of how you got there. You climbed in your car, you put your foot on the gas or on the brake, you turned right, you turned left, you stopped at the light, you may have even been on a phone call at the same time, may have been drinking a drink at the same time without any thought for how you got from one place to the next. You just got there. And if you stop to think about it, you realize I've spent the last 30 minutes transporting myself from one place to another, and I never even thought about how I did it. It just happened. I remember sharing this experience or this principle with someone years ago when I was in Amsterdam, and this individual was from India. And he said, I now get it. I now understand what happened. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I left my office in India in the middle of the day to go to a birthday party for my daughter. And he said, along the way between my office and the house, there's a roundabout. And so I hit the roundabout, I went around the roundabout, and the next thing I knew, I was now walking up the stairs back to my office. And he says, I realized what happened. I had such a strong mental map that I hit that roundabout. I went around it just like I expected. I exited the roundabout, and the next thing you know, I'm back at my office. That is the power of a mental map. That's what can happen when you have a strong mental map. So you don't need to look back, as this chapter says. Instead, let these principles that you've learned and developed and characteristics in your leadership become part of your mental map. Don't look back, but go forward. Continue to practice these principles. Continue to make them part of your mental map so that they're automatic. You don't have to think about them. They're principles that just come from you. They shine from you, and people want to be around you and want to be part of your teams. Your family wants to be part of your life because they're just part of you and you're not thinking about it. It's just who you are. It's your mental map. So let these principles become part of you, and as you do, it will become this mental map that will drive your future forward. Let me reflect for a minute on the second principle that's in this chapter that I think is critically important, and that's this principle of connecting with the spiritual. I firmly believe that all of us have a purpose in this life. It's not foreordained in the sense that we are predestined, in the sense that we are guaranteed that this purpose will play out. We all have our free agency. We can all make choices, good or bad, we can all make choices. But I believe that if we connect with the spiritual, we'll find that doors will be opening for us that we really can't appreciate until we pause long enough to look back and realize that that door was an intentional door that I walked through, and it brought me to this point that only I could be at this point to fulfill whatever that purpose is. It could have something to do with raising a family. It could have something to do with meeting a colleague at work, and that colleague at work opened a door for you to get involved in the community in some form or fashion. It could be that in an experience you had at work prepared you for something that you could not foresee at the time, but prepared you better than anybody else to be able to fulfill that purpose. And when I look back on my life, there is no question that there has been a divine purpose in all of the activities that have led me to where I am at today. And I'll just give you one quick example. When I, early on in my career, I worked for a company called Arthur Andersen. Now, some of you may have heard of Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen was one of the top 5 largest and most revered accounting firms in the world. They had a great reputation. They had been in business for 75 to 80 years, and they had some of the world's largest companies as their auditing and tax clients. Well, along the way, I got started working with Andersen, and I got exposed to a variety of different experiences. I won't take you through the detail of these experiences, but each one of these experiences led to this one climactic moment. And that climactic moment was when Arthur Andersen ran into some accounting issues with the company Enron. And if you know anything about business and what happened there, the summary of that story is that Arthur Andersen lost all their licenses to practice their business and eventually folded and no longer exists today. The company Enron doesn't exist today as a result of that. Well, when that happened, I happened to be the head of human resources in North America. I had just been appointed about 2 months prior to this head of human resources in North America. If I told you the whole story, you would understand that my entire background for 12 years leading up to that moment was all about change. I understood change. I implemented change in hundreds of situations that I was involved in Andersen. I think I understood pretty well how to work through change, organizational and personal change. Well, when that moment happened, this effort was a giant change project. It was nothing more than a giant change project. It was a terrible change project because I had to terminate 26,000 people. I had to unwind the organization down to its bare walls. But every skill that I had learned in all of those experiences leading up to that moment, 2 months prior when I was appointed to that job, all came to bear at that moment. And I think that I reflect back and I think all of those experiences are experiences that were preparing me for what would potentially be an assignment that I would receive. And so when we talk about connecting with the spiritual, it's about understanding that we all have a purpose. It's about understanding that we all have an opportunity to fulfill what I'll call a divine destiny, however you want to define that. And if we will connect with the divine, in whatever that means in your particular background, then we will find guidance along the way that might point us one way or another in ways that we can't fully understand at that moment in time. But only then later, when we look back, do we understand that. Let me give you one other quick example to illustrate this principle. I had finished working for a company, Western Union. Many of you have heard of Western Union because they're a global organization. And I was their chief human resource officer for a number of years. And when that assignment came to an end, I wasn't sure what to do next. Well, one thing led to another. I ended up being offered an opportunity at a company called Digital Globe. Well, Digital Globe was located about 50 miles, well, maybe not 50, maybe 40 miles away from my current home, which meant that I had to travel through a lot of traffic and a lot of things, and ultimately ended up with a commute of about an hour to 10 to an hour and 30 minutes each way every day. And so my wife and I decided that we would consider whether or not we should move. And we didn't want to move. We loved where we lived. We loved the friends that we had. We had no desire to move. But one day, a prompting clearly came to me and to my wife that we needed to move. It was hard to accept, but we knew we absolutely had to make that move. Well, we did. We moved closer to my work. And then about 2 years later, it turns out one of our daughters, who was married and living in the state of Utah at the time, decided to move to Colorado where we were living, and ended up finding a house that ended up being about 3 miles from us. Well, this was during a time of huge economic boom, where any home that was reasonably priced in a decent neighborhood was receiving many offers. And this particular home that she and her husband bought ended up receiving 35 offers. And fortunately, they were the ones selected to be able to purchase this home. And so she and her husband and their young child moved into this home about 3 miles from us. Unfortunately, about a year or two later, she and her husband got a divorce. And we couldn't see it at the time. We couldn't see when we were inspired at that moment that we needed to move to northern Colorado from southern Colorado, and we needed to buy this home. And they ended up being able to purchase a home even though it had 35 other offers on that home. That all of those events transpired in a way that put us close to our daughter and our granddaughter at a moment that they needed us the most, when they needed us to wrap our arms around them with love and help them through a very challenging time. We couldn't see it, but the Lord could, and He put us in a position to allow us to be there at a moment when we needed to be there. And so that is how you connect with the spiritual. So don't deny the divine in your life, and understand you have a purpose. And if you will allow yourself to connect to the divine or that spiritual, that purpose will be unfolded before you in miraculous ways. So let me just kind of share a final thought that I think is critically important here as you continue this journey of leadership. And I love this principle in the book about becoming the captain of your soul. The idea behind that principle is simply that you're in charge of yourself, that you have the opportunity to become the very best that you can become. You have the opportunity to define who you are and who you want to be, as a father, as a mother, as a worker, as a contributor to community, or contributor to church, or in any society way. You have the opportunity to define that. There's nothing to stand in your way of accomplishing that. That's the principle of becoming a captain of your soul. But let me just warn you of one important thing that I discovered in my life that unfortunately I was able to overcome, but it wasn't without a lot of effort. I mentioned earlier that I had the opportunity to work for this company, Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen was a great company. They did wonderful things. They had great ethical values, and they were wonderful people to be around. But they had one characteristic that I think became a little bit of a downfall for them. And that was that they had this unique ability to brand you as Arthur Andersen. You were Arthur Andersen. You went to 3 weeks worth of training within the first month of joining at their training center in Chicago, where you learned what it meant to be part of Arthur Andersen. And you can almost walk through an airport and say, oh, there's an Arthur Andersen employee. Oh, there's an Arthur Andersen employee. That's how powerful that moniker became. It was almost like across your forehead, you could read Arthur Andersen because they had such a powerful way of branding you. Well, with that brand came a huge demand, a demand on your time, and almost an expectation that everything you give is in benefit of this company, and everything else in your life becomes secondary. Well, I got sucked into that. I got sucked into that big time, and the opportunity at this company was ultimately you would work hard and become a partner. And with partner came all the trappings of being a partner of a big worldwide organization. And I worked hard, and I had a very unique circumstance in my employment there that wasn't the same as everybody. So I didn't have a lot of clients that were paying me. I was doing a lot of work. So to become a partner in this organization without having a lot of paying clients behind you was a huge feat. And here I was in this great opportunity. And one day I was appointed 12 years later as a global partner. And I thought, I had arrived. Everything I had worked for, everything I'd sacrificed for, especially my family who sacrificed through all of this, I had arrived. Well, when you become a partner, you're handed a bill. And the bill says, here's how much it costs to join the partnership. And we're going to help you. So over time, as you get your earnings as a partner, we'll take some of that and pay that bill back, so that over time you've paid into the partnership without having too much of a financial burden. Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, we ran into issues with Enron, and the company basically folded. So what was I left with at that point in time? There were no earnings to be able to pay that bill. It was simply a bill. A bank loan, essentially, is what I had been handed that I needed to repay. Everything that I thought was so important, everything that I worked for, all of this sacrifice, all my family sacrifice, ultimately resulted in a bill. Here's how much money you owe back this bank for the loan you took to work for this company. And there's a lot to this story that I won't take time to bore you with, but what you need to understand is this. The mistake I made along the way is I let Arthur Andersen define who I was as a person. I let Arthur Andersen define my brand, my personal brand. I let Arthur Andersen define for me what was most important. And along the way, while I had opportunities to do different things, I never had the courage to step away from those things. I let all of these things that are so unimportant in life define who I was. And at the climax of all of that, I was handed a bill for a loan that I owed back to the bank. And so if I can give you any counsel to take away as you start this journey of your leadership, it would be simply this. Do not let others define who you are and who you are going to be. Become the captain of your own soul and define for yourself, for your family, for your spirit, for everything around you, who you are and who you're going to be. At the end of the day, you may walk away from some great opportunities. At the end of the day, maybe you won't have as much money in the world as somebody else does over here. At the end of the day, maybe you won't drive the nicest car. At the end of the day, maybe you won't have all the trappings that the world would say are important or define status. But you will have a happy soul. You will have a happy life. You will have a happy family. You will have a happy spirit as you connect to the divine, and you will be happy down inside your soul. And that's what this journey is all about. It's about developing these skills for you to be the very best that you can be, to be the kind of leader that you can be. But it's the kind of leader that you can be, not the kind of leader that somebody else wants you to be. And so if you will become the captain of your soul, if you will develop these habits in such a way that they will become part of you, your mental map, and if you will connect to the divine, that spiritual side of you that will guide you along the way, you will have the most happy, the most fulfilled, the most complete life that you could ever ask for. And that would be my wish for you, that you have that kind of life that will bring you that complete peace and happiness that can only come from following these important principles that you've learned over these last many weeks. So thank you. Thank you for letting me share these thoughts with you. And hopefully in some small way, they'll help define that wonderful journey that you're on and will only continue for many, many, many decades to come. I wish you the very best, and take care.